Well, for a roundup on today's political stories, I'm joined now by senior Sky News reporter Andrea Crothers. Andrea, this will be tough news for flood victims. Revelations today that the Defence Force has offered help twice in the lead up to the New South Wales flood crisis, and twice it was knocked back.
Good evening, Chris. Well, it certainly will be tough news for those who already have felt abandoned by the response to the flood crisis, particularly as we've seen even more stories emerge from those who risk their own lives to help save others. So today there is those revelations that the Defence Force had offered to help the SES 3 days before Lismore was swallowed by those floodwaters. Twice they offered that help and twice it was knocked back.
And at that stage, the forecast that we were relying on was that we were expecting northern rivers to be in minor to moderate flood. We resourced appropriately on those levels.
The SES boss says no one could have predicted what would eventually unfold. She also said it was a bit unfair on her members, given that they're actually risking their lives every day to help others. The State Premier, Dominic Perrottet, he has promised a review, particularly looking at this area as well. But despite that, Labor has used this to further criticise the state government over their response.
We're not expecting miracles when disasters like this happen, but we do expect some basic coordination to take place between the New South Wales SES, the Australian Defence Force.
I want an honest review in respect of what could have happened, what could have been better.
To the Prime Minister now, if I can, he has defended his response to the floods this morning.
Scott Morrison, he's come under sustained attacks that he was simply too slow to act when it comes to this particular disaster. He's hit back at that, insisting that he'd acted more swiftly than previous disasters, particularly around the deployment of ADF. But this has really been further intensified after Queensland decided not to be part of that decision for a national emergency declaration. Anastasia Palaszczuk saying that it was simply too late. So these are those powers that the government legislated off the back of the Black Summer bushfires. They're designed to try and ensure that resources can be deployed onto the ground more quickly, whether it be financial or personnel or otherwise. So Scott Morrison today insisting that he wasn't too slow to act.
Well, I don't know if I'd quite put it that way. What I'd say is this. States obviously respond to emergencies. They run the SES, they run the police, they run the hospitals, they run all of those immediate responses. They don't replace that community response. They add to it, they support it, and they bring in the heavy equipment. But as I said, on the very day as the floods hit, ADF were winching people off roofs.
He could declare a national emergency. He could have done that 2 weeks ago. I think Australians are pretty tired of having a Prime Minister that is never there when you need him, and when he's called out on it, finds someone else to blame every time.
Between the floods and a rising cost of living, the Coalition has a lot riding on its pre-election budget, haven't they?
It's just a fortnight away or so. You can expect some big spending there in a bid to try and sway voters back into the Coalition's arms. But particularly when it comes to the rising cost of fuel, we are seeing those prices soar. Certainly some pain at the pump expected for some time yet. There has been discussion about whether the federal government could use that lever in terms of slashing the fuel excise. They're actually facing calls from some of their own interstate colleagues in terms of the South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall, who's facing his own election battle. He's asked that the federal government consider slashing that excise. Now, this morning, Scott Morrison, he was remaining fairly tight-lipped over that, also saying that Australians would know that you aren't going to see a massive change to these fluctuations in fuel prices. But either way, Chris, as this pre-election budget comes out in a fortnight's time, we should expect a few more sweeteners in there.